welcome back, guys, to what is part 3 of our Epstein deep dive. Today, we're going to have a look at the true ideology driving what we've come to see as a class of parasitic people who run the global economy and global politics. One way Darren and I have come to see it is this language of the invisible hand, which we associate with a free and unregulated market. This invisible hand isn't actually invisible, but it is unseen. It is this group of people who are fixing what we know as speculative markets so that they aren't actually speculative at all. They're very much controlling what, the wealth that they extract. And the division they cause within society is also quite breathtaking in its organization. And an example of that is Epstein and Maxwell and how they ran specific forums on networks such as 4chan and Reddit, which paved the way for the MAGA movement and far-right extremist ideology. To them, chaos and division is highly profitable, and this is why they work so hard at destabilizing. Disaster capitalism, as Naomi Klein terms it, is highly profitable. What is that quote, Dara, about how it is better to
finding things on their way to, this is an email to Peter Thiel, finding things on their way to collapse much easier than finding the next bargain.
That's it. And that sums it up. Now, today, as we look at the world and we are descending into World War III, and we're seeing the emergence of some really crazy ideology, religious ideology, theocratic religious ideology, which is that Christian Zionists in the US are viewing this war as a war of Armageddon to bring on the rapture, the return of Jesus. This is a grossly anti-Semitic ideology, but that doesn't seem to deter people from using it. And the reason is because, of course, this class, this Epstein class, they aren't actually religious people, but they know how to use religion to galvanize large cohorts of the population to fulfill what they need. Their true ideologies are godless. This is a class of people who believe that it is possible to use science to defy the laws that govern the rest of us mere mortals. We see this in what is called transhumanism and the scale of the investments people like Epstein and Peter Thiel have made in this industry. So once again, you see it's religion for the basic masses and division, and they are just instruments of control. And they're instruments of galvanization. Meanwhile, this class is feeding parasitically off of the wealth of people and using them. And this is what we need to come to see. And this is how, always keep in mind this invisible hand working behind the scenes, which is really what is going on. So Darren and I are going to attempt to break this down, understand it a little bit better, and eventually look at how that system has come to operate in Ireland, Ireland's place in this global network, and what its place in that value chain means for what actually happens here. And most importantly, by the end, the ways in which we can reclaim power and what it would take to do that, and the most strategic ways of doing it. So there's a lot to cover here. We have a lot to reveal. We've done way more research than we can probably fit into this episode, but we'll definitely cover the bigger revelations that we have come across. So Dara,
revelations, not in the biblical sense.
Yeah, not in the biblical sense. Yeah, like religion. Yeah, there's no rapture, guys. I hate to disappoint you. So, Dara, where should we start?
Yeah, I think the invisible hand is a good place to start, actually. And the invisible hand, as an economics professor, is one of my sworn enemies, that I have to constantly deal with and explain in context. And it's a good place to start in terms of just maybe a small kind of recap of the last couple of episodes, in that the way that this network began and operates really has to be understood through the lens of class war. In that they were really organized crime collaborating with the intelligence agencies, particularly in the US, in England, and in Israel. And this was part of the Cold War, not the Cold War as we're taught in terms of USA versus the Soviet Union, but this transnational elite of parasites against the people of this world. So
Hmm.
the ideology of the invisible hand, it essentially says that you should not regulate or intervene in any way into the market. What do we know? That without intervention in a system of market competition is somebody wins the competition, you get monopoly, you therefore get power that translates into political power, into imperialism and hyper exploitation, essentially.
Hmm.
So the invisible hand ideology had largely been defeated, actually, since the Great Depression in the United States in the 30s, because it was proven to be completely ineffective in dealing with the economy. And we had 40 years of what was called Keynesianism, which was essentially high levels of government intervention to be able to smooth market activity, to prevent the sort of boom bust cycle that capitalism naturally goes through.
Hmm.
And it was really in the 70s where the class war was strongly intensified by the ruling elite, and we saw this big swap over in terms of economic ideology from what had been termed the golden age of capitalism, towards this era of what is called neoliberalism. And neoliberalism is essentially about deregulation. It's about empowerment of the corporation. It's about globalization and therefore imperialism. And the first testing ground, really, for the neoliberal ideology was famously Chile, where they overthrew Allende and replaced him with the Pinochet dictatorship. But
Hmm.
in reality, when we look at Irish economic history, which I think we'll maybe go into later rather than now, it has always
Hmm.
been somewhat neoliberal, as the Irish economy has always been treated as somewhat of a petri dish or a playground for imperial interests, in particular British and American ones.
Yeah.
So when we understand this invisible hand, so Yoav Gallant, who is one of the top Israeli military leaders responsible for the genocide in Gaza, in January, he referred to the Israeli efforts in Iran at this point as the invisible hand operating in Iran, trying to destabilize Iran prior to what we all knew what was coming, that has now happened, an
Hmm.
invasion of Iran
A long
from
awaited. Yeah.
Israel and the United
Hmm.
States.
Hmm.
So this invasion of Iran, this has been planned really since at least the 90s, from the Epstein network, really
Yeah.
from the United States, deep state, since the Islamic Revolution in 1979. But
Hmm.
in 1996, we mentioned this, I think, in a previous episode, but there's a document written for Benjamin Netanyahu on when he was first elected prime minister in 1996. And this document is called Operation Clean Break.
Yeah.
So Netanyahu, his election campaign was bankrolled by somebody called Ronald Lauder, who is the
Hmm.
heir of St. Lauder.
Hmm.
He was likely the man responsible for sourcing an Austrian passport for Epstein in the 80s. He is the person that has secured the lithium deals in Ukraine as a result of the Russian invasion. He is the one leading the charge on the invasion of Greenland, and he is deeply integrated into this network of billionaires and closely associated with the likes of Wexner,
Mhm.
Bronfman, Epstein, etc.
And his
Okay?
industry seems to be resources, Dara, isn't it? When we talk about
Yes.
lithium in Ukraine and we talk about the Arctic, he's the resources guy, maybe.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So he bankrolled Netanyahu's election in 96, and at the same time, there was US defense professionals, people high up in the US Department of Defense that wrote this clean break strategy. And this clean break strategy was essentially written for Israel, where it was designed to go militarily on the front foot. Firstly, to Iraq, but this was sort of the precursor to this strategy of 7 countries in 5 years. Now, the
Yes.
resistance in these countries meant that instead of 5 years, it has taken them about 25 to get to Iran. But Iran being the last country on this list including Syria, which
Mhm.
fell only at the end of 2024. We see within it Lebanon, Palestine, we see Libya, Sudan, Yemen, and more. So
Yeah.
this is a plan coming from the Epstein network, written by Richard Pearl. Now, Richard Pearl is a Mossad asset. He was caught by the US government leaking US intelligence to Israel in the 70s, yet then went on to become a crucial part of US government defense under Reagan, who we know was
Mhm.
also put in power by the Epstein network, then went on to work under George Bush Sr., and then he became one of the key architects of the Iraq War under George Bush Jr.
Yeah.
So we see this invisible hand working behind the scenes from this point on, and in fact,
Mhm.
much earlier. So
Yeah.
when we see what they are trying to do as part of this global class war, really it is just following capitalist logic as part of the class war, and this is a part of their unity, right? We saw
Mhm.
one form of their unity really happening through the mutual blackmail scheme as a way that they could collaborate with a certain level of trust despite being the most evil people on earth. And we
Yeah.
see then this collaboration between them as key, and then division between their enemies, which is essentially the global 99%.
Mhm.
So within this class war, so parasite is a good word for these people, but perhaps even I was thinking the predator class is even better
Yeah.
because in having a predator, you also have prey, right?
Yes.
We are the
Yes.
prey.
We are the
That's
prey.
that's the
Yeah.
reality.
Yeah. We're the world's like poor or grouped into, that broad category compared to them, relative to them, that they'd rather get rid of,
Yeah.
or exploit. If we don't have a use that is, they can
Yeah,
exploit,
and
then
they talk about it openly. I mean,
they
they
do.
talk about there's emails with Bill Gates saying, "How do we get rid of the world's poor people?"
Yep,
This is in the files.
it is.
So when we then look at what is this sort of capitalist logic and how do they make their money? So a way that I recently heard Conor McCabe, the Irish economist, describe capitalism is essentially value in motion, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
So this network, first and foremost, are in the business of motion, moving things. And they specialize in moving things that can't be done by official institutions sometimes. They collaborate with official institutions, but they do the dirty work. They move people, as we focused
Hmm.
on in the last, through human trafficking. They move weapons, as we saw very clearly during the Iran Contra. And this is perhaps how Epstein got involved in this network through Khashoggi, Saudi billionaire Khashoggi. And also, very significantly, money and finance.
Yeah.
So a lot of the work they do is in offshoring, it's in tax avoidance. When you hear a lot of these people justifying why they met with Epstein, they say he was the person in the world who best understood finance, taxes, etc. Okay,
Yeah.
so
And not
essentially,
as they operate for us, but in this kind of, I'm going to call it an underworld because it does operate beyond our sight and outside of the rules that govern the rest of us, mere mortals. And he was the, I suppose, expert, the leading expert in how to hide and move money, um,
yeah.
and how
And
to
also
fix, yeah,
retrieve money, retrieve lost
retrieve.
money. He was also hired as a sort of financial hitman in some ways, a bounty hunter, it seems. So
Right.
he had a very deep understanding of this. So when we understand capitalism as value in motion, you can almost understand it like your blood circulatory system. The faster your blood flows around your body, the more opportunities the parasites have to suck the blood from the body.
Yeah.
So when we think of this, so we look at circulation and essentially what are they trying to do is remove any of the sort of barriers to ever increasing circulation. So any
Hmm.
valves, for example, in terms of, say, regulation, in terms of workers' rights, in terms of trade unions, anything that slows down this circulation, because
Hmm.
essentially that's what capitalism needs to survive, is ever accelerating economic throughput.
Hmm.
Because if next year isn't likely to be as good as this year, people pull out their investments and you then get this bust
There
where
can't be any clotting or stagnation. Basically, it needs to be, yeah, like you said, very fast flowing and moving,
and ever accelerating. Yeah.
ever accelerating. Yeah.
So, what does that also mean, though, is that the parasite is removing ever more blood from the host. Okay.
Mm,
And what do we see happening really now is the parasites are killing the host. Our planet is dying.
yeah.
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 And they know that too. When you look at their emails, they talk about climate change as a way of ethnically cleansing the
Hmm.
world. That's what
Yes.
they talk about. They
Yeah.
compare it to your neurons in your brain. And they
Mm.
say, if your neurons are constantly dying and refreshing, why aren't we also having this with people where we kill off essentially the vulnerable members of our society so that we clear up more resources for ourselves and don't have to support the dead weight?
Exactly. And this speaks to how we must view their ideology as atheist and scientific and never religious. We must never fall into the trap of thinking these people are actually Christian or Jewish or they follow Jesus or they pray. No, this is how they view it. And that is exactly why they're using metaphors like this about the rest of
Mhm.
the population, about being dead weight, weak
Yeah,
cells that aren't, supreme enough, aren't strong enough, aren't fit enough, because this is a survival of the fittest mentality to make
yeah,
it. And if they were only better, they would do better. So what do you do with the weak dead weight? You just kill it. And that's the callousness
yeah,
that we're dealing with. Of course we are. If the Epstein release has taught us anything, it's that these people are not within any kind of bounds of what we would consider even the most basic morality. They're at the extreme opposite end of that.
yeah.
Um, I just,
Exactly. And survival of the fittest, I think, is a great way to understand it because what does survival of the fittest mean when you actually try to understand how they think? Like, it is like an antagonistic relationship between predator and prey, right?
yeah,
Like,
yeah.
that's what exists, and that's what leads to supremacist ideologies, right?
Hmm.
Where
Hmm.
they group themselves essentially into hierarchies. You see how they talk. So, for example, one email that went quite viral was Epstein talking about Goyim. You see this word mentioned a lot, or even how they
Yes.
talk about WASPs, Western Anglo-Saxon Protestants, as being high up the
Yes.
hierarchy, not quite at the top of theirs, but this
Hmm.
is kind of the way that they think, and then it kind of goes down. Irish people, unfortunately, we seem to be quite low down the pecking order.
Oh, Dara, can I just take a second to talk about just how low down we are for what I found? Because I was really curious to look in the Epstein files just to see
Mm,
their perception of us. And my God, we are muck.
mm,
Um, I'm going to think of an example. Yes. So the Saudi Arabian guy, Suleiman, I think is his name. He
Hmm.
obviously had an awful lot of correspondence with Epstein.
Hmm.
And in this thread, um, he was speaking about inviting a guest for dinner, but said, and they spoke about food in very strange ways, which I'm not even going to get into. But he
Hmm.
said that his guest was vegetarian and so didn't eat flesh, no flesh for this guest. And then Epstein said, not even Irish flesh.
Wow.
And yeah, and then there was another of a an undisclosed name, this woman giving out about, the inconvenience of having to deal with drivers and wait staff who don't speak proper English when she was traveling in Sweden. And she said,
Mm.
for even some Westerners don't speak proper English. Look at the Irish, you know.
Uh,
Um, and yeah,
I
there was.
saw as well a exchange between Epstein and Mandelson as well.
Mhm.
I can't remember the exact joke of it, but basically Mandelson, who was Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, remember,
Yeah.
and seemed to also be heavily involved in trying to get Epstein involved in the AIB takeover after
Ye-
the financial crash in '08, and was also asking to be put on the board, I believe, for Glencore, who are one of the biggest shareholders in Aughinish Alumina. And they're even talking about like an Irish person looks at a map and it
Oh,
says,
that's
"You
right.
are here," and then he says, "How did the map know where I was?"
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, yeah.
just these like, casual micro racist jokes.
Yeah. Yeah.
But anyway, like there's a hierarchy and like there's many below us. And I think even if
Mm.
you saw there was a particular email from Ghislaine Maxwell that she sent to all of her closest contacts in the aftermath of 9/11. And by the way, she was invited to be on the 9/11 Commission, despite obviously being heavily involved in
And Shadow
covert
Commission,
activity
Dara.
for 9/11. But she put out
Mm.
she sent an email round, and it said like, imagine you're the in the year 2032, and somebody mentions Arabs,
Oh,
and
yeah.
um, my child, I can't remember exactly what it says. It said, "What are Arabs, mommy?"
Yeah. Yeah.
This fantasy of essentially
Wiping out.
cleansing the planet of
Hmm.
Arabs,
Hmm.
So they have clear supremacist ideology with clear hierarchies, and they
Hmm.
even talk about like the percentage of Jew you are relative to your intelligence.
That's right. Yeah.
They refer to the rest of the world as Goyim,
Hmm.
and they talk even about, how the Jew makes money, and they essentially talk about market manipulation, speculation, futures regarding like shipping futures and this sort of thing.
Yeah.
Okay?
And this is in their own language. And, you're quoting Epstein, who himself says, this is how the Jew make money. Let the Goyim deal in the real world, are his exact
Yeah.
words. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's like one of those things I'm even uncomfortable saying it in case somebody tries to call me
Or
anti-Semitic.
attribute it to you, like
Yeah,
we're
but
being
like I'm
extremely
quoting
clear. This
them,
is
right?
not, you're quoting their own language. So actually they're kind of, trying to perpetuate an anti-Semitic trope here. This is, and it's
Exactly.
it's on them. It is 100% on him. Yeah.
Exactly. So with this, I mean, you look at then this idea of survival of the fittest, So you have your hierarchies, you have your class dynamics that are integrated within the capitalist system already.
Hmm.
You have then the necessity of just general sacrifice zones. And we see that in what are sometimes called peripheral regions, which are essentially regions of the world that have just been designated as producer regions for the needs of the global elite. This can be people. This is typically environmentally destructive economic activity that's designated to occur outside of the imperial core. Okay?
Yes. Hmm.
So we then look at what their sort of strategy has been over the years. And what are they mostly invested in is trying to sort of reorient the state towards their interests,
Yes.
meaning that the state finances all of their costs. And by the state, I mean the taxpayer.
Yes, us.
Yeah. So what does that mean is that essentially the state is a vehicle of extraction for extracting from taxpayers and then subsidizing the elites, the
Yes.
corporations.
Hmm.
Okay. So why is the state so important? First and foremost, the state has a monopoly on violence. It has a monopoly on money creation.
Hmm.
Okay. So they've essentially opened up money taps that just pummel money directly into their corporations. And if you look at all of the richest men on earth and their corporations, essentially they all depend heavily on huge public financing, mostly through subsidies. They also
Hmm.
benefit majorly from market protection in the form of now under Trump, you see tariffs being incredibly important to protect US capitalists from free competition.
Hmm.
And you then even see beyond that is states being used in order to hide money specifically as tax havens. Ireland is one of these, of course. We
Hmm.
saw the Cayman Islands, we saw the Panama Papers, we saw in the 80s these Ansbacher accounts, even in Ireland, for example.
Yeah.
And the idea here really is to move even further beyond the sort of capitalist worker dynamic into this sort of hyper core of people amidst worsening conditions, so that you have this kind of uber elite billionaire class and
Hmm.
really everyone else beyond that. So when you have control over the state, what you also have is an incredible ability to manipulate markets. Okay. So when you understand how a huge amount of finance works, it's actually just a sophisticated form of gambling. Okay.
Yes, it is gambling. Hmm.
So they're just betting on what
Hmm.
direction the made up numbers on the screen are going to move in. And this can be good or bad. Okay. So if
Hmm.
they think that the numbers are going to go down, AKA, if they can spot things on their way to chaos, either they can short it or they can buy it when the price has been pressured downwards,
Hmm.
knowing it'll go back up and they can turn a very
Sell it
quick,
at a profit,
easy,
and this is
significant
their,
profit.
yeah, and of
Yeah,
course they're controlling these things. Yeah.
exactly. Or in the other direction, on the assets they already hold, they are able, through the state, to be able to significantly inflate the value of those assets.
Hmm.
Okay, so when it comes to this gambling, we already know that the Zorro Ranch that Epstein was using in New Mexico as a place near the Mexican border for trafficking, but also it seems like they were doing a lot of genetic testing, breeding as part of this transhumanist ideology you mentioned already. And by the way,
Hmm.
some people, when they hear this, they think conspiracy. This is
Yeah.
reported on by The Guardian, The New York Times, and Alan Dershowitz in 2019. Okay?
Yes, yes. This is, I mean, there's books written on this, there's conferences, Peter Thiel organized with is it Horowitz? They're deeply, deeply committed to this theory and ideology. We just don't hear about it because it's not for us. It's elitist.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
Epstein's donated millions to this, and there's a specific
Hmm.
institution called Humanity Plus, right? So
Humanity Plus, there it is. It's in the name, isn't it?
exactly. And this is like an advanced form of Nazi ideology called
Yep.
eugenics,
Mm.
which is basically morphed into what's now called transhumanism. And it's around biohacking, genetic editing, and trying to live longer, as
Yep.
well as trying to merge humanity with technology, in particular AI.
Yep.
And a lot of this, if you look at the people that Epstein was actually involved with, a lot of them are leading scientists in this field who
Yep.
were seemingly provided labs without any regulation or ethics that will slow down scientists on their way to discovery. And what seems to be happening is that they were trafficking women there, impregnating them. The women,
Hmm.
or likely children, were giving birth to their children. And because they shared 50% of their genetics with them, the stem cells that they were able to extract were a much likelier fit than would just be a random person. And these stem cells are then used as part of sort of organ tissue regeneration internally so that you're regenerating rather than decaying, let's say,
Yeah.
as
Yeah.
a
And
corpse.
and like just these guys, they're so, oh my God, like selfish isn't the word. They're so self-obsessed.
Yeah.
And they also surround themselves with these wellness predators, as I'll now call them, like Deepak Chopra, who talks
Mm,
about the laws of the universe and philosophy, and probably,
yeah.
he talks about this realm of infinite possibilities, and they probably spend their time, um, yeah, trying to create ideologies that make them feel better about, what they're doing or feel vindicated. But they're actually they're crazy.
Yeah.
But you spoke about Epstein in terms of gambling. You were going to say about his gambling and how he fixed to win
Yeah.
the
So
lotto.
so basically like Zorro Ranch, like
Mhm.
there was an $85 million Powerball win, essentially the lotto that supposedly Epstein won twice somehow.
Twice.
So,
Wow,
like,
really lucky
when
guy.
we
That's
think
that's
about
so
like this sort of sophisticated gambling, or like, I mean, there's just a prime example of they
it's
have
fixed.
completely rigged the whole market. The
It's rigged.
invisible hand, once more, has
Yeah.
been able to completely fix the market in their favor. And this happens, you see it across the board. So, like, it's in terms of like markets, of course, as well. And
Hmm.
we saw the example even in episode 2 where you were talking about even the Irish government and rezoning, where essentially what
Yes.
happens, you get
Yeah.
a rich person with political sway donates X amount of money to Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael, then buy up some cheap land that was only used for farming, and
Hmm.
then the Irish government will go in and basically put in drainage, they'll put in a road,
Electricity.
and all of a sudden this land is now residential and will skyrocket in value. That's just a very easy and simple example. But it's a way that market manipulation can work through government intervention in speculative finance.
Exactly. So if you have prior knowledge, which they do, before these major shock events, like, if we look today, the good example of what they knew was going to happen, which is that Iran would close the Strait of Hormuz,
Mhm.
people investing in things like LNG or alternative energy in the run up to that.
Yeah.
I mean, this is how it works.
Exactly. And that's another good example because, again, if you look back to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, again, largely provoked and understood by the Epstein network, you can go back in their emails and you can see more than 10 years ago they're discussing the Russian invasion of Ukraine, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And even why, like what happened in 2014, there was a US backed coup on Ukraine that everybody knew, including the Epstein network, would eventually turn into a conflict.
Yeah.
So,
And can
mhm,
I just read an email on that that you shared with me about, how it perfectly sums up what's happening, what happened in Venezuela and what's happening in Iran now.
mhm,
From Jeffrey Epstein to Peter Thiel, the intentionality argument would center on making sure the US gets less involved with the rest of the world. I think that's the plan. The more of a mess with just lots of bad guys on different sides, the less we will do.
yeah.
Mm.
And that's in response, I think, like just below that,
Oh,
if
I
you
should have
look,
read that first. This is from Jeffrey Epstein. Peter Thiel had written the email I just read. So Jeffrey Epstein said, "I keep hearing your intentionality argument. Imagine if this mess is what Obama really wanted: Iraq, Iran, Libya, Syria, Palestine, Lebanon, Egypt. We would have to admit a strategy brilliantly executed." This was in 2014.
exactly.
Yeah.
So you see it, and even the like bad guys, like what happened just before Venezuela was invaded, just before Iran, Maduro was vilified, Khamenei was vilified, and the average Joe is kind of just tricked into thinking, oh, everyone's evil, they're both bad. Iran and Venezuela are as bad as the
Yeah.
US and Israel. It's just bad guys on all sides, and we should just sort of disconnect and lose our ability to think critically about the
I know, and
situation.
it's just like I never cease to be amazed by people who, show so many other signs of like really high levels of critical thinking who can fall prey to these things. Like, just the basic concept of sovereignty is just that non-interference and the right, and there's laws written, the UN Charter,
Yeah,
you can't just go in and aggressively bomb or attempt to take over a sovereign nation, and doing so is illegal. And there's all this moralizing that goes on, about women's rights in Iran, and they don't see the clear contradictions about, Trump's very close relationship with the Saudi
yeah,
Arabian king, who is like, I mean, women in Saudi Arabia weren't able to drive, I think, until was it 2018? They had record executions in 2025, but that's fine because he's a buddy. But
yeah,
I mean, and it really it just goes to show the scale of the
yeah.
propaganda and its impact on
It's
the
very
people.
effective. And
Yes,
like
yeah,
unfortunately now, like, I'm always caught in between this thing where it's kind of easy sometimes to get frustrated with people because you're just like,
yeah,
why can't you be just consistent and just like view things through even just the lens of human rights and international law? They're not perfect, but like they're
yeah.
enough.
Hmm.
But the propaganda machine is just so effective, and for most people now, everyone is just tired and scared and just
Yeah, I'd agree with
confused,
that.
and you just
Yeah,
like whatever you read the headlines and you just say like, okay, well, that's all I have. I don't know where else to look. I don't know. So,
yeah.
it's just like it goes to show how effective the propaganda machine is and how important it is for, everyone just to keep trying to dig into things and just keep trying to understand how
And
the
diversify.
system works, because the strategy is always to turn it into an ethical argument about individuals. And
Mm,
our challenge is always to try and help people understand the system itself.
yeah.
And that regardless of the person at the top of the system, really, that the
Like
behavior is
Trump.
largely predetermined.
Yeah, like Trump, it wouldn't matter. I mean, Kamala Harris would be doing it in a skirt.
Exactly.
That's all that would be different. And she would be using nicer language, and, she'd be kind of, saying charming things about, being able to break an egg with one hand.
Yeah,
And everyone would be like, oh my God, girl power, this is amazing.
yeah,
And we've just got to really see through that rubbish identity
exactly.
politics, and how that is nothing. Like that is just a front.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
the behavior, I mean, again, to quote Conor McCabe, we've been reading him recently,
Oh
was
yeah, he's
he,
amazing.
he had a good quote in The Sins of the Father, and it says, under capitalism, there's no such thing as an ethical banker, just either a profitable banker or a
Mhm.
non-profitable banker,
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
that's it. That's just the logic. And like,
Mhm.
if you don't work with the momentum of the system, you're punished. The
Yeah.
system prioritizes circulation and accumulation. And if
Yeah.
you slow either of those things down, you're out. That's the name of the
Right.
game. So when we then even consider like Venezuela or Iran in this case, and we think again back to just finance. So when we look at what they do, so they're also heavily involved in currency. Yeah.
Yeah.
So specifically something on Venezuela and Iran that's worth noting. There's a guy called Scott Bessent. He's this US Secretary of the Treasury appointed by Trump.
Hmm.
And it was quite significant when he was appointed because, firstly, he's the man in charge of deciding whether the financial aspects of the Epstein files are released or not. Of course, he's not
Hmm.
releasing them. And secondly, because he's widely regarded to be essentially a currency assassin.
A
Jeffrey
currency
Sachs
assassin.
describes him as this. And he was a architect of Soros Management Fund in the 90s when they bet against the pound sterling. It was a very famous day, I think it's called Black Wednesday, where he bet against it, made billions. by
Mhm.
betting against the US or by betting against the British pound sterling. He then did the same thing in 2013 with the Japanese yen. He was brought in to take down the currencies of Venezuela and Iran, which were turned into essentially the least valuable currencies and the currencies with highest inflation on earth. And
Mm.
Scott Bessent at the World Economic Forum only less than 2 months ago, he called his intervention in Iran, he was bragging about it, calling it economic statecraft.
That's
He
right.
was
I saw
claiming
that video.
responsibility
Economic
for
statecraft.
the unrest in Iran. All of the
Mm.
protests, all of the things that were being shared by Western media were, even according to him,
Yeah.
his doing through
Mhm.
the takedown of the Iranian currency. Businesses no longer had any capital, people couldn't buy things, and this is as a result of the US dollar's supremacy throughout the world, which is
Mhm.
being really threatened. And this is another key reason why the US is really converting all of the soft power they'd built up over the last 80 years into just overt hard military power.
Yes.
So this is very key to understanding and a crucial part of modern warfare, where it's essentially you destabilize, de-develop, destroy. That's sort of the
Mhm.
framework into which they operate. With Iran, they're on the destroy part of this
Yeah.
strategy right now.
Mhm.
And when we then look into currencies too, we also see another form of very sophisticated betting that Epstein was involved in was forex trading, betting on the value of currencies that he also had insider knowledge on. We knew this. I mean, Peter Mandelson is even warning him in advance of the bailout. Like, and you also see that the Epstein network, there's emails between Epstein and Ito, who was running a lab in MIT. And basically, there was a somewhat of a crash in Bitcoin in 2015, and they take three of the five Bitcoin developers into their network in 2015. Yeah. And
Mhm.
Bitcoin, I mean, it's a pure Ponzi scheme, you know,
Yeah.
like all
Yeah.
of these things, like in terms of what Bitcoin is, how it could be used. I mean, it's still not capable of being a currency that you can actually use. You know,
It's
it's
a Ponzi
purely
scheme.
speculation. It's an asset. It's a store of value that's very difficult to trace, hence why it's useful to them. But it's pure Ponzi scheme. They
Yeah.
control all of it from the coding to the Bitcoins themselves.
Yeah. And Ponzi scheme, Professor Yang, or is that his name? Who uses game theory to predict political events, and he's done it with some great like precision lately. And he talks about how the American economy is essentially a Ponzi scheme. And he actually predicts that their latest kind of assault is going to end very badly for them, because that house of cards is going to fall. And
Yeah,
he
well,
spoke
that's the
about it
thing.
in terms of AI and the overinvestment in AI. Apparently, a lot of um, the normalizing Arab traders have heavily invested in AI, and they see that
Mhm.
bubble about to burst because of Iran's counterattacks. And when you look at where Iran is attacking strategically, they bombed an Amazon data center.
Yeah.
So Iran is like this, I suppose, looking at Iran's counterattack, and what they're aiming and going for strategically, we can kind of see the weak spots in this system.
Mhm.
And Iran is essentially the only power fighting or resisting this empire. And yeah, seeing them go for the data centers is very interesting, isn't it?
It is. And I mean, within this, Iran are being very strategic. I mean, you have to remember, like, since the day of the Islamic Revolution in 1979, they've been in a war with the United States.
Yeah,
You know,
absolutely.
like any
Hmm.
country that tries to claim and express its sovereignty from day one will essentially be in a war with the United States. You
Yes.
know, we saw this with Venezuela from the day that Hugo Chavez was elected. They were at
Hmm.
war with the United States. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
the Iranians have been preparing for this for their entire existence. Like from day
Hmm.
one, what happened was the US and the Israelis turned Saddam Hussein's Iraq against Iran, immediately they're forced into a long war,
Yeah.
right?
Hmm.
And they have been building up the capacity for this war ever since and have their targets. I mean, also, if you look, they've been taking out basically US bases that have taken decades to build up. They've been
Mm.
taking out radar systems, they've been taking out aircraft, etc. And this is huge economic cost as well as strategic blows. It's still within the realms of being expected, right? But
Yeah.
it is interesting to see what they're choosing to target first anyway. And with the
Yeah.
data centers, have we seen in Ireland? I mean, when we did a podcast on Irish complicity in
Mm.
the genocide in Gaza,
Hmm.
it was mostly through the Irish tech companies,
Yes.
or the tech companies in Ireland. And a huge amount of the intelligence that was being used for this AI warfare in Gaza was being stored in Irish data centers.
Yes.
A huge amount of our trade relations with Israel are through the tech companies, through
Hmm.
microprocessors and things like this. So we see what has now become a complete fusion between technology, AI, and the military industrial complex. I think the company who best represent that are likely Palantir with Peter Thiel and
Hmm.
Alex Karp. And within this, you further understand Gaza as a testing ground. It still
Yeah.
is that, you know?
Yeah.
And like when we were trying to make sense, why is it still going on? Why is it going on in this way? Is so that they can train their AI systems to be better at murdering people. That's the
Yeah,
reality.
even to the extent that they want it to be done autonomously. We saw last week the news of the AI, the contracted AI company servicing the US military. The name escapes me now. People might know it, withdrawing their services.
It was
Well, they
Claude
were
AI.
sacked. What is it, Dara?
Claude AI.
Yeah, yeah. Because of the for ethical reasons. Now, I'm sure this company isn't ethical, but this is what we're
Yeah, they
hearing.
already work with Palantir, but
Yeah, I
they did
mean,
something. Yeah.
maybe they had a little red line somewhere.
Yeah.
And who stepped in to take their
ChatGPT.
place? Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah.
So there'll always be someone to step in.
Yeah.
Um, what I think is would be interesting to do now is to look at Ireland's place in this chain, okay,
Hmm.
and what we are to the US, and kind of um, what was the turning point. So we've come to understand, and a lot of the work that I've been reading, Conor McCabe's, you're reading him as well, is just absolutely, I think, the best Irish economist, isn't he? Like people talk
Hmm.
about David McWilliams. Seriously,
Hmm.
like we need to be reading Conor McCabe because he is absolutely brilliant. But he's helped me to understand in a, or to be able to kind of clarify my understanding of what the Irish economy is. Like from the
Hmm.
get-go, the Irish economy, the dream of 1916 was to create a 32 county socialist republic. That was the dream. And as soon as the reins of power were taken after the partition treaty, because that's what it was, what you see is the emergence of what he terms a comprador class. And this is a class of people who are willing to work with, foreign investors, outside powers, for them to extract maximum profit with the least, the tiniest or non-existent tax bill possible,
Hmm.
using the Irish people again as the base to fund that. What
Hmm.
happened was that Ireland industrialised via a policy of foreign direct investment and not the development of a homegrown domestic industry.
Hmm. Hmm.
In the early years, we saw what was called the grazier class, who were the owners of the massive ranches that were built by the British during the famine when they levelled smaller farms and homesteads to create these massive ranches so that lots of cattle could be grazed and exported to feed Britain. And then obviously after the War of Independence, these were taken by the compradors
Yeah.
and they occupied this space in Irish society. So they opened the gates for Ireland to be colonized differently, which is what James Connolly said. I always come back to that quote. We never really stopped being colonized.
Yeah.
Um, and I suppose maybe we could talk about key events. And you and I were talking about this because I know we've talked in previous episodes about different parts of Irish history. But
Yeah.
maybe a good place to start would be, do you think, the creation of the IFSC?
Yeah.
Do you think that would be a good place to kind of, yeah, what
Yeah.
that was and how it happened?
Yeah, it's certainly a moment, I think, and it's a good moment to maybe link in with some of this other stuff, especially around finance and
Yeah,
organized crime through finance.
yeah.
Um, so yeah, when it comes to Ireland, we see essentially like this strategy, but as you say, kind of going back to the formation of the Free State in 1922, where you just have people already working for foreign interest. We can sort of understand the sort of Cumann na Gael government from 1922 who go on to become Fine Gael as the Contras in a certain way. They were the
Mm.
counter-revolutionaries
Hmm.
responsible for overturning the progress made by the people and back towards the interests of the Anglo-Irish elite and British imperial interests. And that meant ensuring that Ireland remained, despite having like an independent government in the 26 counties, is remaining as a dependent economy. So
Yes, that
essentially
is so
staying
crucial.
staying as a regional economy, which meant being the supplier of cattle to the British. That
Yeah.
was our key function, really.
Hmm.
And you saw some attempts to introduce tariffs by Fianna Fáil in 1932, but they wouldn't challenge the parity that the Irish currency had with the British, which meant we
Hmm.
didn't have the sovereignty or the credit to be able to industrialize because we wouldn't go up against the British interests and we wouldn't go against the interests of the sort of rancher class. And that led to a lot of general stagnation in the country. And rather than take on these contradictions directly, um, Conor McCabe talks about Sean Lamass choosing this third way, which essentially was opening Ireland up to foreign direct investment in the
Hmm.
late 50s. So,
Hmm.
to put this into a bit of context, just to remind us that we know at this point that the Irish government, in collaboration with the Irish Catholic Church, in particular Archbishop McQuaid, was working with FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover,
Yeah.
and we're foot soldiers of the class war.
Hmm.
The US post World War II was spending a lot of money in Europe to prevent the spread of communism and essentially to further the capitalist agenda and to then try and bring US corporations into Europe. And Ireland was a key vehicle for them to do so. So when Ireland was opening up to FDI, there was a lot of trips made between Ireland and New York in the 50s, that then encouraged US corporations to come and set up shop in Ireland. So this sort of led to this big era that has existed kind of since then of speculation and
Yes.
where we see finance and government directed initiatives, subsidies, tax breaks, etc., become really a crucial part of government strategy. And one of the key things that happened was the PAYE, the pay as you earn scheme, which
Hmm.
the government used essentially to tax the Irish workers and subsidize corporations to
In the
entice
60s,
them
Cara.
into
Mm.
setting up in Ireland.
Yeah,
Yeah.
in the 60s. Okay.
So the big sort of benefactors of this, so rather than try and stimulate Irish exports, which meant having to take on specific interests and to have an independent currency that we could then actually create credit and finance indigenous industry instead of bringing in and trying to stimulate exports, we just brought in exporters who
Yeah.
would already be established corporations. They wouldn't
Mhm.
pay tax here. They would employ builders who were perhaps the key benefactors of this,
Mhm.
contractors, land speculators, banks, finance, etc., were the kind of winners of this strategy, while the workers were actually subsidizing it all because the
Mhm.
government would be essentially paying for it. They weren't owning it. And then the government ended up in a lot of these buildings that were even built through speculation, becoming renters
Paying them
themselves.
rent,
Yeah,
paying them
yeah,
rent.
yeah,
Yeah, and this is crucial, everything you've just said here, because we are taught the opposite. We are fed this diet of we'd have nothing if it wasn't for the American companies coming in and paying our wages. We'd have nothing. And there's this sense of kind of reverence towards them, and it is taboo to kind of say anything to them. And what we're missing is the fact that we are subsidizing them. They're extracting from us. And what we missed when we gained so-called independence was the freedom to establish our own domestic industries, which we never did. That opportunity was
yeah,
taken from us. And we need to
yeah,
understand that. And
exactly.
flip that narrative, because you were saying last week, Tara, that according to Conor McCabe's calculations, the average
The median.
tax, the median, sorry, tax paid by these corporations is zero.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean,
Exactly, you know, and like you saw that, I mean, the most famous example was the Apple case where they were
mhm.
caught to be paying a real tax rate of 0.0005%. And then you wonder, what are they bringing? Especially that now, that they're increasingly automating their workforces. They're not paying tax. They're using up all of our energy and our resources. What are they doing here? What's the deal? Who is making money out of this,
Yeah.
Because it's not the average Irish person. So, like, even when we look at the structure of the Irish economy, the vast majority of the Irish economy is just services. It's retail, it's services, it's people just working normal jobs. It's
This
not
is
in the tech companies. I
this
think,
is mind-blowing stuff. This is not what we are taught.
no. Yeah.
Yeah,
Like, I think, like, tech in Ireland, like, it employs somewhere around 5% of the population, 5 to 7%,
5%.
and the
Yeah, tiny.
multinational tech companies even less. So when we think of this, so what happened when Lamass comes in? So FDI really, I think, is maybe 1957 or so. What
Hmm.
does he do? He overturns what was called the Control of Manufactures Act that was established by Fianna Fáil in 1932. That meant that Irish industry had to be at least partially controlled, maybe 50% or so, by Irish people.
Hmm.
China did the exact same thing when they opened up in the 70s, and look at them now. I mean,
Yeah.
now they're the big superpower and competitor in technology because
Hmm.
they've said that Chinese had to own at least 50% of whatever foreign corporation was setting up here. Ireland
Yeah.
had something similar. Lamass turned it over in the 50s. And this also came in the wake of a trip to New York. There's somebody called Briscoe. I can't remember now
John
which
Briscoe, is
Briscoe
it?
is which. There was a John and a Ben. I think Ben was his son.
Right. Hmm.
Um, and Briscoe had been a part of the Irish Revolution, was a comrade of Lamass, and then used his expertise from the IRA to go to Palestine and help
He was a
to.
Zionist. He was a Jewish Zionist, wasn't he? Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So he then goes and does a lot of training. He also was smuggling weapons to Ireland from Germany during the revolution, and he then is helping Zionist paramilitary gangs to
Air
ethnically
gun
cleanse
and yeah.
Palestine during this
Yeah.
time. He
Hmm.
then goes over to New York in the 50s. He meets with a lot of the Epstein network before Epstein was in it, of
Yeah.
course. But at this
Hmm.
point, I'm talking like the likes of Rockefeller,
Hmm.
Lehman,
Hmm.
and people named in Whitney Webb's research as being key parts of this organized crime network in New
Hmm.
York in the 50s. And then a lot of money starts coming into Ireland at this time. Again, the Irish benefactors of this are the compradors. They're the middlemen
Hmm.
who are
Hmm.
essentially facilitators of foreign capital getting access to Ireland, depending on what their needs are. But typically at this point, it's taking advantage of tax breaks and cheap labor.
Hmm.
And then over time, this strategy becomes incredibly lucrative, especially as I mentioned for the speculators, in particular the banks who were financing a lot of this. Banks are always just trying to give out more credit.
Yeah.
You then have the construction industry who are doing a huge amount of
Because
building during this period. That's
that's
the
the main
main source
industry, isn't
of
it?
Irish involvement. Exactly.
Building the companies of these foreign direct investors
Exactly. And in the meantime,
and then
they're
handing
basically
the ownership to
selling
them.
off all of Ireland's resources. So you
Yes.
see some like famous examples, for example, Whiddy Island, Bantry Bay, huge amount of our energy
Mining in
being
Avoca,
extracted, mining,
oil,
all of these
in
dirty
Kinsale.
industries
Yeah.
without any Irish ownership and also
Not paying
without
tax.
Irish taxation. You
Not paying
know,
tax.
like we
Given
weren't,
grants, actually.
yeah, we were
Yeah.
paying them to rob us, you know,
We were
and
paying
like,
them to rob us, and someone was getting a nice little cut, weren't they? Mm.
exactly. And I was reminded reading some of it. There's a good quote from Pater O'Donnell, and he talks actually about sort of the mindset of Michael Collins. And like he says basically, so this is from Richard Barrett, who was executed on December 8th, 1922 by the Irish Free State. And he says, from Barrett, I got a picture of Collins that always made him a tragedy to me. Without any guidance except his own turbulent nationalism, with the weakness for intrigue and conspiracy that secret societies breed, he confused the conquest with the mere occupation of the country, with British soldiers and the personal influence of the undesirables. He failed to recognize that the military occupation was merely to make the imperial exploitation possible. So, even though the 26 counties got rid of the British army, the
Mm.
imperial interests remained and, in fact,
Yeah.
strengthened, and, in fact, were actually completely surrendered over time
Mm.
by the Irish comprador class.
Yeah.
And significantly, Lamass, who kind of begun what was known as the Lamass or the Whitaker Revolution, is the father-in-law of Haughey, who really then
Keep it
accelerates
in the
this.
family. This is another theme that we
Yeah,
see.
exactly.
The
And it's
importance of
Haughey
the
who
intermarriage of these.
introduces.
Yeah, sorry, go
Sorry,
on.
no, you go on. Yeah, the family aspect is worth commenting on.
Yeah, no, just there's how these lineages prevail throughout the generations. And it's quite extraordinary how enduring they are. And we can look at lots of different examples on a global level. You could look at Rockefeller. Here in Ireland, you could look at Guinness. You could look at Desmond. You hear that name,
Coveney.
Coveney. Yeah, and just how far back they go. So when you talk here about Sean Lamass being married to the Charlie Haughey's daughter, isn't it? It was his
Haughey married
father-in-law.
Lamass's daughter. Ah,
Yeah, yeah. And sorry, yeah, the other way around. And like this strategic intermarrying, these alliances that we kind of, I know for anyone who's studied history, you'd look at dynasties in the past and how these marriages between monarchs were arranged
hmm.
based, strategically on economic and other kinds of interests.
Yeah, but it's good. I think even the Guinness family is another kind of can of worms. I don't know if we
Maybe
should
not.
even
We won't
open
get there,
it.
but yeah.
But I mean, even with the Guinness family, like the two families that Whitney Webb says are behind the Epstein network, the Rothschilds and the Goldsmiths, the Guinness
Mhm.
family are married into both,
Yeah, there
you
you go.
know?
Yeah.
And like, even with the Guinness family, even what do they do? People assume it's just beer, but actually, no, they've been involved in merchant banking for centuries. And
Mm,
like the big scandal, financial scandal in Ireland of the 80s and 90s was through the Guinness Mahon Bank. And
mm.
the Ansbacher accounts, essentially, where all of the Irish corporate media political elite were hiding and
Hiding
offshoring
money.
all of their money in the Cayman Islands through the Ansbacher accounts. This was being led seemingly by Dermot Desmond, who is credited with the idea for the IFSC,
There
you
we
know?
go. Nicely
And
done.
like he was also in all of the Moriarty tribunals, etc., was funding Haughey directly. So Haughey, people also don't realize sometimes Haughey, and there's similarities here with Trump. Both of them essentially went
Mm.
bankrupt. Yeah. And
Mhm.
then Trump, he was bailed out by the Rothschilds in the early 90s.
Yeah.
And
There's
Haughey
they're servants of this network.
exactly. And like that's
Yeah.
one of the things in terms of finance, and this is like an imperialist strategy, is just make people in debt to you and you control them.
Mhm. Yeah.
You know,
In
like
whatever
that's
way.
what the IMF and the World Bank do to countries in the global south, but people
Mhm.
do it between people too.
Yeah.
And Haughey, he was essentially bailed out and then controlled by this golden circle. Dermot Desmond is one of them, Ben Dunn, Michael Smurfit,
Hmm.
these people, Dennis O'Brien,
Hmm.
essentially pulling the strings, and they then all go on to become some of the richest people in Ireland, billionaires in many cases. And why? Because when you think of finance as sophisticated gambling, and you then have the power to rig markets through heads of state, you can make significant amount of money. And what do we
First
also
10.
know under capitalism? Capital begets capital, right? You
Hmm.
can turn it into more money very easily once you
You
do,
have it.
because you have a huge amount of control. Under a free market economy, we can think of a liberal democracy of one vote, one person. In a free market economy, it's €1, one vote. So
Yeah.
that leads
Yeah.
to these distortions when you have the likes of Dermot Desmond and these other billionaires who are able to essentially control the state.
Exactly. And Dermot Desmond, you said the IFSC was his brainchild. So now we're kind of coming closer, having kind of given the background to all of that, what was happening in the Irish economy, to the setting up of this by the billionaire Dermot Desmond.
Yeah, and actually, just while we're talking of Dermot Desmond, he's named in the Epstein files, by the way.
Oh, yes.
Not directly, but he's one of the owners of Sandy Lane Hotel. I
Mhm.
think it's in Barbados. But he's being discussed by Epstein and Epstein's associates in his email as being the richest and most
Shrewdest
shrewd of the Anglo-Irish
Anglo-Irish.
billionaires. And
Yeah.
this, again, is another one of these islands which is like a playground for billionaires. He also is a significant owner of half of this island. I think it's called Canuan or something like this. And it's literally their slogan for this island is called "Where billionaires can escape millionaires." You know, talking about
Right.
supremacy and hierarchy. And Dermot Desmond is like the key man in terms of being an owner on this island.
So they can't, like, the more money they make, the more challenging it is for them to find satisfaction in things because they need to have this elite feeling and they can't be around mere millionaires to
Yeah.
achieve that. They've got to
No,
create this.
billionaires became too, or millionaires became too mainstream, it seems.
They're like the chavs of this
Yeah,
class.
yeah.
My God. So
Yeah.
they've got to kind of continuously build these levels of exclusivity. And we see the most extreme end of that is transhumanism. They're bored now of consolidating wealth because, they've achieved that.
Yeah, and you
Um,
get to a certain point, you can't do much more with it, like
yeah.
you can never spend this money. You convert it into as much power as you can, and then you have to start finding other outlets. But even with Dermot Desmond, I think there's other good examples in terms of just how this sort of organized crime system works. But like all of these scandals in the 80s and 90s, Dermot Desmond seems to really be at the center of them. So he sets up basically like a money brokers. Firstly, even going back a bit further, like he's for some reason in Afghanistan, in Kabul, 1979, with the World Bank just before the Soviets invade. I don't know why. It's not really published or discussed elsewhere. And there's also conflicting reports on whether he's there with the World Bank or PricewaterhouseCoopers or whatever. But anyway, he comes back to Dublin, sets up this NCB, firstly money brokers, then stockbrokers. He's also going to New York to have meetings with finance people. his idea, his best thing he's ever been involved in, he says, was setting up the IFSC, which directly benefits his own business because he essentially doesn't have to pay tax anymore.
Mhm.
He's
Mhm.
then involved in all of this offshoring for the Irish elite in the Cayman Islands. And then all of these dodgy deals that are happening, like Johnson, Mooney, and O'Brien scandal, like making millions in months just by buying and selling at the right times, paying off Haughey. He also, this very controversial Digiphone license deal with Dennis O'Brien, they both made hundreds of millions
Yeah.
through pure corruption through Michael Lowry.
Yeah,
And
yeah. Called
continues then.
profoundly corrupt in the Moriarty Tribunal, but ends up propping up a very unpopular fringe government um,
Yeah.
in an election with the lowest voter turnout. But that you see them making a comeback, and you see, um, yeah, the likes of Micheál Martin and Simon Harris defend their decisions and not blink, not
Yeah.
blink.
Exactly. And even in this, Dermot Desmond was still making money through leaked information with NAMA, like in 2012, it doesn't
Yeah,
stop.
of course.
And
NAMA
like,
was, yeah. So in terms of like what the IFSC, what it represented and what it functioned as, and the kind of the I suppose turn in direction, in a new
so
direction of the
essentially it's
Irish
like
economy.
a localized tax haven in Dublin,
Yeah. Yeah.
on the Docklands. And with this, basically, the idea is to attract financial companies to Ireland through tax incentives. So this has been the strategy now going back at this point for about 30 years. And
Hmm.
within the IFSC, the deal is officially that companies only have to pay 10% tax. Prior to that, there were tax breaks given out to other industries with the idea that other industries would actually generate jobs. And that was the reason for it. But 1987 was then it expands to finance. And
Yes.
that seems to be a direct result of the outsized power that the banks have in Ireland at this
This
time.
is the invisible hand
Yeah.
making its way into the structure of the Irish economy. Yeah.
Exactly. And by this point, I think it was in 1985 where the Irish government like bailed out AIB already at that point. I think AIB had purchased an insurance company that was doing all sorts of dodgy deals and would have bankrupt AIB. Irish government bailed them out in 1985 without
Or the people
any
did. The people bailed them out.
the people
Yeah.
did, and the Irish government, there was no deal. It was literally like, they didn't ask for nationalization. They didn't ask for anything other than a discounted rate on like a loan or something.
Yeah, the Irish government at the time of the collapse, there's a reference in an email to how they were kind of a lame duck government, that kind of left the Irish taxpayers with an average bill of above 50,000 per person in the country is how it worked out as.
Yeah.
Enormous. Way worse than any other country. And we re-elected the same government that did that. Ireland is a study case in
Yeah.
docility of the Irish population, and I suppose the efficacy of propaganda on the population, and a study in the weakness of opposition political parties too, is how I
Yeah.
feel when I learn all
Yeah.
of this. Because as
Yeah.
we've been exchanging all of these um, insights and into these corrupt individuals who have been literally found to be corrupt and keep making comebacks, who keep and maintain their dominance over the
Yeah.
Irish market. No lessons are ever learned. And it just, yeah, it's difficult to understand our docility. And it's difficult to
Mhm.
understand how public interest journalism vanished so thoroughly in this
Yeah.
country.
Yeah.
Um, and
It's
what a
it's
clawback.
amazing. Yeah.
Like there's go ahead.
No, I was gonna say just with journalism, like even looking back on some of the reporting, which was already a cover up, but it's actually still sometimes surprising saying, "Oh, I can't believe they actually said that."
Yeah.
Like in the Irish Times or whatever, who now are just like they wouldn't dare say something like this, but at least they put up a signpost towards the truth, where
Mm,
now they don't. And
mm,
like even throughout all of this, one thing I even came across, another very suspicious story I came across in the Irish Times is Simon Coveney's dad, Hugh Coveney,
Hmm.
um, who was, another significant Fine Gael politician. He was discovered to have had offshore accounts in the Ansbacher accounts, Guinness Mahon.
Was he
And
accused of it, Dara, or was he actually, charged as such?
I
Was it
believe at this point he was just accused, but
right?
he was
Yeah.
being summoned to the Moriarty Tribunal
He
to
was
give
being summoned.
evidence.
Okay. Yeah.
He then goes and updates his will, and the next day falls off a cliff.
Absolutely bizarre chain of events.
And then he's found to have Ansbacher accounts a couple of years later, something that Simon Coveney, who actually took his place, there was an election. Simon Covey steps in and takes his place.
Took his father's seat.
Yeah. And
And where is that?
his family had denied any involvement in the Ansbacher scandal.
Yeah.
And that's just one little example. I mean, as you
It's
said at the start,
bizarre.
there's too much. There's actually too much to fit into
We're
this.
not short of any bizarre examples of this.
Yeah.
And then Simon Coveney left Fine Gael shortly after Leo Varadkar's resignation. There was kind of a bit of a wave.
Yeah.
And I think you said that he spends quite a significant portion of his time in, where is it? Saudi, it's not Saudi Arabia, is it?
Maybe
Um,
in UAE. I can't remember exactly.
in the Middle East. Yeah, as a
Yeah, he
consultant. So
goes
it's
for a
interesting.
week every month, and he's also, I think, was hired by EY Geopolitical Unit, where he obviously has direct connection to the Irish government. They talk about this revolving door, right?
Yes, this
Um,
revolving door
and
is so
this is
important. You
an
see it in
example.
journalism too.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Hmm.
So basically, what is the Irish economy at this point is, again, you have the sort of predator class, the dictatorship of the invisible hand, and then you have the parasites maybe below them, who are the compradors in the Irish government, who are being controlled by this golden circle, who I mentioned already.
Yeah.
And what is the Irish economy at this point is really it's speculation. It's the government incentivizing builders to just keep building because
Hmm.
builders have significant power. There was actually a fundraising scheme within Fianna Fáil. I can't remember the name of it now. Was it FARC or something like this? Going back to the
PACA,
seven.
the fundraising.
Yeah. And it was
Yeah.
basically a direct way to just pay your way into the
You
room
looked at the
with
list
Fianna
of
Fáil
donors. I think
politicians.
Rosita Sweetman was the journalist at the time, said all you have to do is look at the donors of TACA to see who are the top
Yeah.
developers in.
And apparently they were all big names in construction.
Yeah.
And basically, then they were just lobbying the government to finance and give tax breaks to their building so they could essentially have dramatically reduced costs through taxpayer money. And then you have the banks being able to give out credit and therefore they make their money without necessarily thinking about the demand, which you need to have like a comfortable enough population to be able to actually buy the things that you're
This is
selling.
the beginning of the disaster, everything you're
Yeah.
describing now.
So
There,
the
this
government
isn't.
steps in because like they were building all of these houses and offices. The government then starts to rent them directly from the builders and banks. Um, and it's literally just this wealth transfer that we see all throughout the world, but it's basically just transferring wealth from the working classes to the elites. And that's the sort of method where you reorient the state towards the interests of the like corporate elite, essentially.
Mhm, mhm.
So
And
when you
yeah.
have this sort of economy that's built on speculation and it's built through artificially inflating asset prices, it's not rooted in industry. It's not
Mhm,
rooted in something that has positive knock-on effects to the rest of the economy. And that remains today in that the companies that we have active in Ireland, they don't export products. They
mhm.
don't have secondary economies that surround them. They basically exist in and of themselves through speculation and inflated assets. And this then is a key part of the reason why Ireland has had such a turbulent boom bust cycle is because once
It's a
the
Ponzi
asset
scheme.
bubble bursts, you
Mm.
then get recession. When you have recession, you then need bailout, which is again another wealth transfer. It's
Yes,
then transferred to these
opportunity.
people. They
Mhm.
buy up the cheap assets when they're cheapest. I mean, look at Nama. And
Mhm.
then they start to skyrocket in value again, and you have an even greater concentration of wealth.
And the people at the helm of this are dealing in the, speculative economy, which is what Jeffrey Epstein said was this is how the Jew makes money, and let the goyim deal in the real world. So this economy isn't based on a material reality. It is an invention. It is speculative. It's a gambling house. Um, and it is backed up and insured and underwritten by the taxpayer who ultimately serves
Mhm.
it. And this is how
Yeah.
the Irish economy came to be structured. Um, yeah, it's really sad.
Yeah, and unfortunately, nothing has really changed. You know, it's
Mm,
like one of
mm.
these things that like what do they call it? Like leprechaun economics or something. And these like strategies that have even become more sophisticated, of like the double Irish, these kind of bookkeeping techniques that companies use Ireland for in order to dodge tax. Like that's
Yeah,
really
that's
sort of
what we're
our
used.
role now in the
Mm.
system is we host data centers, which take all of our energy, or at
And
least
water.
more than 20% of water and energy. We host the most destructive sort of industries in terms of mining. You now see big campaigns on the Sperrins. You see the Aughinish plant there.
They're
And
poisoning us. They're poisoning us. We're on the periphery, as you said earlier, and our
yeah,
place in the value chain dictates the kind of industry that is inflicted on us. Is the word, because this isn't anything to be grateful for. This is, I mean, if you ever take off over Shannon, I remember the first time I ever saw Aughinish, and I was like, it fucking looks like Mars. Like it's this red. It's the most bizarre sight you will see when you take off over Shannon. You can't miss it.
yeah,
And of course, there's today in the forecourts, you were there yesterday. Um, the Environmental Trust is taking on Aughinish because they want to just continue expanding, despite the fact that so many um, charges have been brought against them for their impact on the local population, for the health, like they've destroyed farmers' lives. Um, and this is not yet rectified. There has been no justice for any of these claims. And I just think anyone reading about this now could watch that YouTube documentary called The Aughinish Incident. And I think it's by a guy called Kev Collins.
yeah,
And it's a good insight into the toxic nature of these kinds of industries that once again are inflicted on us. In this case, it's a Russian oligarch. Um, his name escapes me now.
Deripaska or something. And
Deripaska.
Roman
Yeah, there you
Abramovich as
go.
well was involved with them, named in the Epstein files, previous owner of Chelsea, big Zionist too.
Yeah.
The other people involved in this were Glencore, again, deep into the Epstein files if you want to. I think it's a guy called Mark Rich. And then there's also some native involvement, I believe, with Roadstone too, I think, with
I
CRH.
mentioned that actually, Dara,
Yeah,
earlier in the week to talk about what we were going to be talking about. And as we were saying, there's so many examples. We couldn't possibly get through them all, but Roadstone, a shocking example of politicians directly profiting from these companies that are charged with and accused of breaking things like competition law,
Mhm.
aggressively eating up competitors, and most disturbingly, probably no, two things actually. I don't know which one well, yeah. The fact that Judge Moriarty couldn't adjudicate against charges brought against Roadstone in the Moriarty Tribunal because he himself owned 500,000 in shares. So that was just, skipped on
Yeah,
by. I mean, seriously. And the fact that it bought an Israeli cement company, and the cement of that company was used to build the apartheid wall.
yeah,
And
yeah, yeah,
so we get confused when Irish politicians won't move to the will of the people, and then we see that they're intrinsically connected to these companies that are profiting from the kind of designed chaos and crime that happens around the world. And that's why we
yeah.
need to kind of not be confused about that, because like you've been explaining, the state has been set up to serve the interests of this parasite class and not the people. And maybe this would be a good time to, I suppose, orient the conversation to how we take power back and how we reorient the state. Because, I mean, there's a lot of helplessness, there's a lot of powerlessness, there's a lot of tuning out happening with people who are feeling crushed by the weight of the power, the sheer power that these people have. I mean, they have nuclear weapons. They can finish us all with the touch of a button if they want.
Hmm. Hmm.
It can feel like, we are powerless in this, but we're actually not. And, history provides us with so many great examples of people who have been able to lift the oppressed out of hopeless situations. And by using strategy and
Hmm.
by, identifying our areas of power, because we do still have some power in the system, we aren't using it. Maybe
Hmm.
we're not recognizing it, but we do have it.
Yeah.
And I like to think of this of us as like mosquitoes. We can think we're facing a giant, but like if you've ever tried to sleep in a room with a mosquito,
Hmm.
like the tiny, annoying buzzing noise, you can't get any fucking sleep. And like
Hmm.
it'll bite you all night until you get it. And like a swarm of us versus them, it is possible. And like I said, history gives us examples of, you know, um, people looking and seemingly extremely powerless taking on the system and actually
Yeah.
making headway. What do you think about that?
Yeah, completely. And like, even when we think of this, this network, this system of just organized crime and class war, and, you mentioned at the start of just their strategy, like they have their strategies of maintaining their class unity, and then they have their
Mm.
strategies of dividing ours, right?
Yes,
And
yes.
what do they do? I mean, you see, like, as you mentioned, like Maxwell and Epstein, like running these forums on Reddit and 4chan to divide us,
Yeah,
right? You
yeah.
see then their strategy in terms of destabilization,
Hmm.
and they deliberately are creating refugees. I mean, the war on terror just between 2001 and 2020 created, I think, according to RTE, 37 million refugees, right? These are refugees that they then traffic. Yeah, they
Mm.
then profit from in terms of direct provision centers. We looked into that in episode 2 of this
Hmm.
series,
Hmm.
and they then, through the media that they control, through Murdoch, through Maxwell, etc., they then use the refugees that they created to divide the working class communities that they put these direct provision centers into without any transparency or dialogue, while we know people directly connected to this Epstein network, in particular the Duggans and the McSweeneys,
Hmm.
make millions.
Yeah,
And where do the profits for these direct provision centers go? To the Isle of Man, so that
yeah.
they can be hidden from us, right?
Yeah, yeah. And
So,
just before we continue, I just want to say some small thing about how bad our opposition and disappointing it can be. In a recent old debate about having public consultations before the implementation of IPAS centres in specific locations, there were some opposition parties who said that saying that politicians profit from IPAS centres in a kind of backhanded way is conspiratorial.
mm,
Very disappointing and
yeah.
has to be addressed because we keep looking for saviors. And I think if anything is clear, what needs to emerge in Ireland is a new wave, which is truly grassroots, led by the people and the working class.
Exactly. And like
Mm.
that's where our unity has to come from,
Yeah,
is like at the end of the day, what does this network show us is that this is like now survival of the fittest. That's how they see it,
yeah,
right? Whether, however you want to be involved in this class war, you are, that is
mm.
it. We have to stop pretending it's not antagonistic because it is.
Yeah,
And we have to unify over our shared interests, just like they're doing. Yeah. So like the good thing in Ireland, like even though right now it's difficult to find hope sometimes, but we have legends to look back on
We
and
do. We
have
really do.
successful
That we've
strategies
forgotten.
to understand, you know? And like when you look at Ireland and the Irish economy, and you look at the people who have walked down this path before us, they looked at essentially where are the choke points in society, in the economy as a whole, right?
Mhm.
Where do we have influence? And this influence, like in parts of the economy, is evaporating. Look at tech, look at automation and AI, right?
Mhm.
Look at the jobs on LinkedIn. Half of them are getting people to train
Train AI.
AI, you know?
Train
And
AI to take your job.
so there's like some urgency in terms of trying to get organized around our shared interests. And in Ireland, what do you have now? You have 30% of the country who are renters, and they own 3% of the wealth, right? The
Mhm. Mhm.
property owning classes, which is the 70% who still have shared interests because the vast majority of them are working class. Um, but you have a very high degree of concentration of wealth, and you have a growing part of the population who are being left with very little.
And a widening of relative poverty, which Micheál Martin doesn't even think is a bad thing, even though relative poverty means you don't have enough to live a normal life. But
Yeah.
Micheál Martin is like, that's fine because he believes in the enterprise economy. And
Mm.
inequality is a feature of that. And here we are, not understanding that we are being led by people who actually do not care for
Yeah.
people living in conditions below normal standards because they see that as you're losing. We're
And
we're
relative poverty, it matters a huge amount because we're all in competition. We're in a system of market competition where one person can own 100 gaffs and
yeah.
one person has to rent for their whole life. You know,
Yes.
that's it.
Yeah.
And they
Yeah.
create this scarcity very deliberately. But so when we look at, say, renters who are now being exploited to levels that can't continue. But there now is a huge growing movement, for example, in Ireland behind Catu, at least in
Tattoo.
Dublin
Yeah.
anyway. And
Hmm.
there's strategies being discussed, like rent strikes, for example,
Hmm.
is
Hmm.
just a key source of agency that renters, 30% of the population, like this, can do.
Overnight could stall and seize and paralyze the economy. It needs support though.
Yeah. Then there's other movements happening in Dublin throughout the country, especially in, like, for example, squatting. People see this as a very bad word sometimes in Ireland because of our politeness and our
Mm.
manners and our respect for authority. But
Hmm.
there's about 15 vacant properties for every homeless person in Dublin, you
50.
know? And what better form of resistance than just living there, living in
Yeah.
these empty, vacant, derelict properties and claiming them, you know? Then we also look at organized working class strikes. If we look at the 1916 revolution, the momentum behind that came from the Dublin lockout in Dublin through
Yes. Jim
organized
Larkin.
labour led by James
Mm.
Connolly and Jim Larkin.
Hmm.
And in outside of Ireland, what have we seen throughout history is land agitation. And we've seen incredible resistance throughout the country around land. We still see the power of this grazier class, the rancher class, who own huge swathes of Ireland while the majority have to do very low paid work on these farms. Again, this is another key source of power in the Irish economy that the average person does have. You saw Jim Larkin in 1913 doing a lot of work organizing the dock workers. Yeah,
Yes.
where
Yeah.
this was a key choke point in the Irish economy that he identified because of Ireland's role essentially as a hub for transport. Yeah. So
Hmm.
we
Strategic targets where it can create the maximum pain for this class of profiteers who are just not playing by the rules.
Exactly. And like
Mm.
even in terms of like boycotts, again, these have been like people confuse, I think, the modern day boycott for what a boycott actually was. But a boycott throughout history was far more organized and it was done
Mm.
not on an individual consuming or not consuming something, but collective efforts to boycott.
Mhm.
And when we look at these, so in terms of this system and how they understand it and how we need to start understanding it, it's about power. ethics are out the window. There's no ethics under capitalism. Yeah,
Mm.
it's
Mhm.
profits or not profitable. That's the
That's
logic.
it. That's the
So
binary. Hmm.
your power has to be through organized resistance to that, where you have a capitalist who might say that ethically they just want to make as much money as they want so they can pay their employees, blah, blah, blah. A worker wants to just get paid enough so they can survive the month. Both of these things can be understood morally, or they can be understood through a power dynamic where you say, actually, you need to fight for your rights. Because once organized labor went under assault, really from the 60s, 70s onwards, what happened? CEO and shareholder value multiplies by 100, worker wages plummet. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Mhm.
we need to really start organizing and building power where we can identify it in
And
our context.
and recognize the ways it has been dismantled. I think Bertie Ahern was pivotal in making trade unions in Ireland pretty much impotent.
Haughey and Ahern in 87 through this social partnership, which
Yeah.
basically removed the teeth from the Irish trade union movement, who just in the 80s alone, I think, had like 100 strikes or something. And then in the 15 years after the crash in 2008, had maybe less than 10, you know?
Yeah,
Like,
because I hear a lot of language now, people going, it's illegal to strike. We can't actually strike because we're not allowed. And you're kind of going, you're missing the point now at
yeah,
this point, at this stage.
yeah,
That has been robbed from people.
yeah.
Um,
And then I think, in just terms of our general resistance, is also, as we mentioned at the start, is trying to understand the behavior of the system rather than trying to do the typical moral adjudication that happens in Irish media and politics and saying, oh, the banks, there was an absence of morality, or, oh, like it
Absolutely.
was negligence and
If there was a few bad
stupidity.
apples there, they were very bad men, and everyone else was just doing their best. And these few bad apples not realizing it is the entire system.
Exactly. The
Um,
system rewards this behavior and sanctions socially these type of people, you know?
yeah.
So we need to be thinking about systems change as really like a battle for survival at this point when you
And
factor in
urgently so.
environmental breakdown, AI and other things, as well as, of course, war that the Irish government are actively trying to sign us up to, and stop thinking about the morals or the accidents of one person. No, the
It's not just
behavior.
that. Yeah.
And why is it that when we look back on our podcasts from months ago, we can predict it, is because
Yes,
it's
we
largely
keep doing that.
predetermined. It's predetermined
It is
by the
predetermined.
framework of the system, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
So this systemic analysis is also very important for us to consider, which means understanding the capitalist system and capitalist logic, and where are we actually collectively going, and how do we change course and
Fast. Good
really
topic.
organize a society around human and ecological needs.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think this is a good place to end, like to stop moralizing, to look at the ways in which we can reclaim power. This is a power struggle. This is a power struggle. And it is a class struggle. It is 1000% a class struggle. Sometimes when I post things about how, the class system works in Ireland, people are so deluded. There's
Yeah.
no class system in Ireland. There's, I mean, it's a material reality. Like anyone who understands the very, very basic tenets of capitalism, it's undeniable. Yet here we have people saying, no, we don't have that. So there's a lot of awakening that needs to happen, but always as well reminding people that change is really only ever brought about by a very, very the concerted efforts of like really dedicated people. But we kind of need that to start growing and intensifying now. And I think, yeah, we need to kind of say the bolder things and start really, really pinpointing where we need to be focusing everything now. Because look at the world today. They're on Iran. If we look at that Operation Clean Break plan and their advancement through that plan, they're at the phase where they're destroying Iran, the last bastion of resistance in the Middle East.
Mhm.
And what becomes of the world if they continue to win and we continue to divide along stupid identity politics? and made up fights and pretending to believe that they think this is a religious war. They don't think this is a religious war. Yeah, I think being a revolutionary, I was saying this to a friend last night about how the word spirit is linked to the word revolutionary, like having a revolutionary spirit. Like you couldn't say to someone, do you have a political spirit? Because that's absolutely fucking makes no sense. And to kind of have a revolutionary mindset is inherently hopeful. And it has always been hopeless for revolutionaries. The cause has always seemed hopeless, but that's what history teaches us is it's possible with a strategic, organized mindset, a refusal to accept conditions as they are, and an inherent belief in the power of people. But we just need to galvanize that belief in people now. We need people to understand that we do have power. It has been eroded over decades. We're in an information environment now that saturates us with propaganda. It really is an assault on our minds. But we claim power back by looking strategically and looking at the system as it is. And I just hope that people can find confidence in seeing it for what it is. And I hope we've helped them to do that and to look at what the Epstein class is in terms of the system and to never pick individuals to choose as fall guys. It's not what it is. It's not what it is. And I remain stubbornly hopeful because what other option do we have?
Yeah. What's the Gramsci quote? Pessimism of the intellect, optimism of the will.
Love it. Yeah. I love that. And, we've got to believe that it's possible. Yeah. And I think that's a really nice place to end this. And thanks everyone for listening. And we will be back again soon, no doubt.